We've got to talk about this new investigation that recently became public, with it coming from The Insider in collaboration with 60 Minutes and Der Spiegel, with it uncovering new evidence linking Russia to the phenomenon known as Havana syndrome, and specifically finding that this mysterious illness may have its origin in the use of, quote, directed energy weapons wielded by members of a GRU hit squad simply known as Unit 29-155. And not only that, but this investigation found reason to believe that the US government not only knows more than it's letting on, but is actually intentionally misleading the public. But with all that said, just to kind of jog your memory, right, this all started back in 2016, because that's when several US diplomats stationed in Havana, Cuba, as well as CIA agents acting undercover as diplomats started reporting strange symptoms that seemingly had no explanation, with many saying that they were alone in their homes or hotel rooms when they suddenly heard a strange sound, and then suffering hearing loss, nausea, headaches, or some other ailment. And so this mysterious illness, these unexplained anomalous health incidents, or AHIs as the US government calls them, came to be known as Havana syndrome, with some anonymous US officials soon speaking to the press to say they had been targeted with an advanced device that operated outside the range of audible sound, and also saying that the investigators were looking into the possibility that the attacks were carried out by a third country, such as Russia. But, since then, evidence to support that theory, it's been very hard to come by, and that as even more cases were reported elsewhere, with the most well-documented being in China in 2018, with the US even walking back on its claims that these were attacks at all, with some even suggesting this whole thing was a breakout of mass psychogenic illness, with us even saying things like this one Vanity Fair piece that claimed to have the definitive real story behind Havana syndrome, arguing that it was just the result of, quote, psychological contagion. Though I should note that even before this investigation, there were real problems with that theory, or at least with it being the only explanation. Because, at least 100 AHI cases have been reported worldwide, affecting American spies, diplomats, military officers, their families, and even household pets. And many of them have actually been diagnosed with mild traumatic brain injuries. And in fact, some have suffered from such severe long-term effects they can, quote, no longer function on a day-to-day basis and have been medically retired from government service. And actually, when the State Department convened a meeting of academic and government experts to review the Havana cases, one of these experts said there was not one individual on the team who was not convinced that this was a real thing. Well, David Relman, a Stanford University professor who led another study on Havana syndrome, said they found clear evidence of an injury to the brain. One of the ways this investigation has actually connected Russia to these injuries is by geolocating known Russian operatives to places around the world just before or at the time of reported incidents. And these operatives, as mentioned, are part of Unit 29-155, which, unlike other units within Russia's intelligence services, is devoted exclusively to so-called kinetic, or in other words, violent military operations, with that including assassination, sabotage, and political destabilization, with a former high-ranking CIA officer telling The Insider their mission is to find, fix, and finish, all in support of Vladimir Putin's imperial dreams. And in one instance, a high-ranking member of the unit named Igor Gordienko, he was in Frankfurt at the same time a US government employee reported symptoms consistent with what came to be known as Havana syndrome, and that notably being in 2014, a full 2 years before everything happened in Cuba. And it happened after that government employee had an encounter with a man with a Russian accent acting suspiciously across the road from the consulate residential complex. And when the investigation showed the employee a photo of Gordienko, he, quote, did not hesitate in confirming that Gordienko was the suspect skulking around outside U.S. consulate housing. And we saw much of the same thing in a 2021 case in Georgia, where the wife of a U.S. official was taking her laundry out of the dryer when she felt a sharp pain in her left ear followed by a piercing headache. And when she looked outside, she said she saw a black Mercedes parked directly opposite her laundry room and a man standing nearby. And while she photographed the car, she wasn't able to get a picture of the man before he drove away. But according to 2 U.S. government officials and other reporting, it may have been a guy by the name of Albert Averiano, who's the son of the founding commander of Unit 29-155, who's been groomed for espionage since childhood, and whose email activity and other evidence placed him there at the time of the attack. And again, when the woman was shown a photograph of this man, she recognized him immediately. Notably, this woman has some of the most severe injuries of any victim, having undergone 2 surgeries already and actually now needing a third to address the rapid deterioration of her temporal bone, which is a condition that she says her neurosurgeon cannot explain. Right now with this, obviously these are just 2 cases, and the investigation didn't necessarily place a Russian operative at the scene of every single reported attack. One thing that does connect almost all of the attacks is that they involve U.S. personnel with subject matter expertise in Russia or operational experience in countries such as Georgia and Ukraine, which are 2 former Soviet states that have undergone pro-Western revolutions. And Greg Edgreen, who led the military investigation of Havana syndrome, saying,
consistently, there was a Russia nexus. There was some angle where they had worked against Russia, focused on Russia, and done extremely well.
And in fact, Ed Green also told 60 Minutes that if he was wrong about Russia being behind anomalous health incidents, he would come on the show and eat his time. And importantly with all this, the investigation also uncovered actual documents indicating Russian involvement, with this including something written by a high-ranking official and former KGB agent, which said that hundreds of employees of foreign intelligence services have been identified and neutralized in recent years. And that also including a document showing senior members of Unit 29-155 being tasked with and rewarded for successfully testing, quote, non-lethal acoustic weapons. And, notably, there's a well-documented history of Russia trying to develop these types of weapons. As far back as 1974, a Soviet patent was issued to a military unit that developed and claimed to have successfully tested, quote, a non-lethal device inducing sleep in the target via the use of radio waves. And in 2010, according to another document uncovered by this investigation, research had taken place in Russia on the development of basic technologies for the creation of a new generation of sonar and acoustic weapons systems. And so basically, all of this together, testimonies from victims placing Russian operatives at the scene of attacks, the history, and these other documents, they paint a pretty convincing picture of Russia being behind this in one way or another. But despite that, in March of last year, the U.S. intelligence community issued a report stating that it was very unlikely that AHIs were caused by a foreign adversary, and saying that the symptoms were probably due to pre-existing conditions, conventional illnesses, and environmental factors. With that notably seeming to directly contradict a report from a year earlier, with that earlier one finding that AHIs had, quote, a unique combination of core characteristics that cannot be explained by known environmental or medical conditions and could be due to external stimuli, as well as going against what their own people who investigated the matter had said, like Greg Edgreen. So of course, for many of the people who have always believed that they were attacked, this all felt like a slap in the face. With the investigation also reporting that many felt betrayed by their government, in fact saying that a consensus has formed among them that the US government, and the CIA in particular, that they're hiding the full extent of what they know about Havana syndrome. And this including the first CIA officer to be affected in Cuba, who told the Insider either the intelligence community is incapable of carrying out its most basic function, or it has worked to cover up the facts and gaslight injured employees and the public. And Mark Lindsay, the State Department official who was allegedly attacked in China, he says that US government personnel have actually privately acknowledged that his illness was the result of some sort of energy weapon. And as far as what reason would the US government have to cover this up, one theory is that this could arguably be considered an act of war, and they'd much rather handle things behind the scene rather than things blowing up publicly. The second main theory is that it could limit recruitment to the CIA and State Department. But I do want to stress, with all of this said, there's still so much we do not know. For example, the investigation notes that it's still unclear exactly how the attacks were carried out or whether multiple types of devices have been used, with some skeptics still arguing that building a weapon like this that could be easily transported is a technical impossibility. And so while this investigation has revealed so many things, in many ways, this is still very much a mystery. But with all that said, I now want to pass the question off to you. What are your thoughts with all this? Let me know what you're thinking in those comments down below.